pride, jealousy, intrigue, violence, deception, amazing abilities. These words perfectly describe the latest vampire teenage romance novel, but that's not what we'll be talking about tonight. I'm talking about the Trojan War. Hello, my name is Lester Babsworth Esquire II, and tonight we'll be diving deep into a world of gods, heroes, and lovers. We will take an unadulterated look at what happened during the Trojan War. Was it caused by love, or was it simply war? Or did Pat Benatar get it right when she said, love is a battlefield? Find out tonight on Myth-steries of the past.
What's up with the lisp?
Oh no, it's not a list, that's the name of the show. It's Myth-steries of the past.
Okay, great. Still sounds like a lisp though.
Fact or fiction? True story or the invention of man? Most of what we know of the Trojan War comes from a collection of books known as the Trojan War cycle. Among these books stand two of the more popular. The Iliad, the story of Achilles and other heroes during the Trojan War, and the Odyssey, the story of one of those heroes, Odysseus, and his return home after the Trojan War. These stories were passed down orally until finally being written down by a man named Homer. Tonight, we'll be diving into both fiction and fact of these stories, as these books potentially contain both. Let's begin by starting with the mythological aspect. The Trojan War was a conflict of man started by gods. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite found themselves at odds over a golden apple. No, not that apple. Okay, it's not that apple either. There we go. This golden apple, known as the Apple of Discord, was presented to the three goddesses by Eris, known as the Goddess of Discord. Eris said the apple would go to the fairest of the three. The goddesses, each convinced of deserving the apple, appealed to Zeus in an attempt to settle their disagreement. Zeus, not wanting to cause problems and put the goddesses at ease, made a shocking decision. A decision that would change the course of history and lead to a bloody, violent, and unnecessary 10-year war. Zeus left the choice to the Prince of Troy, Paris. Oh my gosh, no, it's not that Paris. Come on, guys. No, he left the choice to Paris to decide who was the fairest of the three. The three goddesses each made their case to Paris and tried to sweeten the deal. Hera promised him great riches and power. Athena promised him success on the battlefield. But it was Aphrodite who made Paris an offer he couldn't refuse. Aphrodite promised to make Helen, the most beautiful of all mortal women, fall in love with Paris. And Paris quickly picked Aphrodite as the fairest of the three goddesses. But Helen was already married to the king of Sparta. Yes, that's Sparta. Good, we got one right. His name was Menelaus, a man of great power and influence. On a visit to Sparta, Paris met Helen and Menelaus, but shady things were afoot. What the? Oh my gosh. Why in the world do we have a stock file photo of a foot? When would that ever come in handy? No, that's not what I meant. Somebody's getting fired. Anyway, when Menelaus was called away, Paris and Helen made their escape to Troy. Upon hearing of the elopement of Helen and Paris, and in a move of certain desperation, Menelaus sought the help of his brother, Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, to launch a mission to rescue Helen. Agamemnon, enraged by the act of disgrace done by Helen and Paris towards his brother, approaches other cities asking for men and weapons, with 146 of those cities answering his call. His plan? To attack Troy. These cities provide some of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. Odysseus, Ajax, Achilles, who will need to prepare to fight some of Troy's finest, namely Paris, Hector, and others. Agamemnon is approached by a soothsayer who foretells that Troy will one day fall, but after 10 years of war. This proves to be the case when Agamemnon's army attacks the wrong city, believing it to be part of Troy. Achilles becomes frustrated with the leadership of Agamemnon and lets him know in no uncertain terms, saying,
"Staggering drunk with your dog's eyes, your fawn's heart, never once did you arm with the troops and go to battle, or risk an ambush packed with Achaea's picked men. You lack the courage. You can see death coming. Safer by far, you find, to foray all through camp, commandeering the prize of any man who speaks against you. King who devours his people, worthless husks the men you rule."
Achilles then leaves Agamemnon's army. Agamemnon becomes increasingly desperate. He is under the impression that Artemis is displeased with him, and in a desperate attempt to appease her, sacrifices his own daughter. The second attack of Troy occurs an estimated 8 years later, and not much is known about what happens in the meantime. This attack results in an abundance of death and destruction. Hector kills the Greek hero Patroclus. By this point, Achilles has returned. Achilles, outraged at the murder of his friend, kills Hector, but his hate for this man does not stop there. Homer recounts this event by saying,
"Then he'd yoke his racing team to the chariot harness, lash the corpse of Hector behind the car for dragging and haul him 3 times round the dead Patroclus's tomb, and then he'd rest again in his tents and leave the body sprawled face down in the dust."
Achilles' victory is short-lived. Paris shoots an arrow guided by Apollo into the heel of Achilles, killing the legend. Well, I guess that stock image came in handy after all. He shot him right there. Ajax, devastated over the death of Achilles and frustrated at not receiving his weapons after his death, kills himself. Not long afterwards, Paris is then confronted by Philoctetes and killed. The man who was promised a woman and given a war instead was finally dead. The Greeks realize their current war tactic is proving unsuccessful and decide to take a different course of action. They build a giant horse out of wood, placing a large group of Greek warriors inside. The rest of the army packs up camp, heads for their ships, and begin to sail away. At nightfall, the horse is left on the doorstep of Troy. The Trojans, seeing the retreating ships, view the horse as a type of surrender and bring it into the city. The Greeks pour out of the giant wooden horse and kill every man in Troy, taking the women and the children as spoils of war. Using fire, they signal to the retreating ships to return to help in the rampage. Menelaus had every intention of killing Helen upon seeing her again, but Helen, using her feminine charm, convinced him otherwise. The war was finally over, and everyone could return home. For some, home meant peace from a bloody, violent, 10-year-long war. For others, home meant more death and more destruction. And some didn't even make it home until many years later, such is the case of Odysseus in the Odyssey by Homer. Now, as much doubt shrouds Homer as does certain aspects of the Trojan War. Did Homer actually exist? If so, who was he? Was he actually blind? Did he write the Iliad and the Odyssey? Many arguments, debates, and research have been done regarding this topic, but we won't be going into that tonight. Our sights must be kept on Troy. However, If we are to doubt the veracity of the existence of the man who wrote these stories, should we doubt the stories themselves? Did Troy exist? If so, where? Was it actually attacked? What were Greek societies like at that time? We'll now be diving in to the historical aspect of the Trojan War after these messages. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the mythological aspect of the Trojan War. Now we'll be diving into the historical aspect. Troy was believed to have existed during the Bronze Age, between 3000 BC and 1200 BC. But what exactly were societies like during this time?
Homer's epics and other stories about the Trojan War focus heavily on the heroes. In some versions, they are the literal children of gods, such as Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, and so on, but fail to really capture the common warrior. What were these people like? Most likely they were herdsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, doctors, peasants, and so on. These were not trained or skilled warriors. They were common people, called to arms by their king or leader, such as when Agamemnon called upon his own people and neighboring cities to fight in the Trojan War. Oikos is a word describing a household consisting of people and possessions owned by a free man. These units provided safety and security. Depending on the amount of influence or wealth an oikos had, typically measured in land, one might rise to power and begin to claim royal authority over other oikos in the area. Land was typically used to herd animals and rarely for agriculture. Oikos were typically able to supply for their own needs, with the exception of metalworking. Food and goods were often stored in the cellar of the head of the oikos. They were then distributed according to need. Records of such storehouses were kept not only regarding food and goods, but also treasures such as gold, bronze, and so on. It is possible that Agamemnon himself was the leader of a powerful oikos, and he called upon other oikos to help him in battle. A man possessing vast land or large herds may rise to power and be given the responsibility of deciding to go to war, and then overseeing that war. Of course, certain benefits came with being king, such as the right to a much larger portion of booty after raiding or defeating a city, as well as an estate for yourself. The king would often call together assemblies if he felt he needed to discuss something important. He wanted the common people to express their opinions, within a certain limit. The king always had the final say on any matter. Gifts were often accumulated with the purpose of regifting. Peace and strong ties between families and political groups were based upon the giving and receiving of gifts. More value was placed upon the giving aspect rather than the actual value of the gift given. The polytheistic Greek religion is clearly woven throughout the story of the Trojan War. Although it is clear the gods were not directly responsible for the war, their presence in the mythology clearly demonstrates how deep-rooted the Greeks were in these beliefs. But where was Troy exactly? Do we know? We may have an idea. Back in the late 1860s, a man by the name of Frank Calvert was certain Troy was located near present-day Çanakkale, Turkey. He began an investigation, but, due to lack of funds, was forced to quit. Heinrich Schliemann, intrigued by the work of Calvert and armed with enough money for an excavation, began his search in the early 1870s with the help of Wilhelm Dorpfeld, who continued Schliemann's work until 1890. Carl Blegen then reopened the excavation during the 1930s. After Blegen's work, the site was not examined until the late 1980s. But what did these people find exactly? In total, it is believed that there were 9 settlements of Troy. We will briefly talk about 7 tonight. Troy I was the most superficial of the settlements and was settled sometime between 2920 BC and 2450 BC. With the discovery of Troy II, which seemed to exist at the same time as Troy 1, Schliemann believed that he had found the seemingly mythical city of the Iliad and the gold of King Priam. This is a picture of his wife, completely covered in all the treasures and riches he found. Upon making this discovery, Schliemann said, "I have proved that in remote antiquity there was in the plain of Troy a large city, destroyed of old by a fearful catastrophe. This city answers perfectly to the Homeric description of the site of sacred Ilios. My work at Troy is now ended forever. How it has been performed I now leave finally to the judgment of candid readers and honest students." Unfortunately, this was not the case. Dorpfield continued the work of Schliemann, but disagreed with him. Troy 3, 4, and 5 existed between 2450 BC and 1700 BC, and were not believed to be the Troy of ancient text. Dorpfield became convinced that he had found the true Troy with the discovery of the settlement of Troy 6. Troy 6 had impressive walls guarding the city. Dorpfield believed the evidence clearly indicated the city had been overrun by another group of people. Blegen, following up on the discoveries of Dorpfield, was not as convinced, due to the evidence that Troy 6 had been destroyed by an earthquake, but that it was Troy 7a which was the true Troy. Troy 7a was the rebuilt Troy 6, although the layout of the city changed slightly. Throughout Troy 7a, there were burn marks, evidence of violent destruction, and remains of bodies, proof of an attack. Blegen said,
We believe that Troy 7a has yielded actual evidence showing that the town was subjected to siege, capture, and destruction by hostile forces at some time in the general period assigned by Greek tradition to the Trojan War, and that it may safely be identified as the Troy of Priam and of Homer.
Modern-day excavators seem convinced as well that Troy 7a, or possibly a combination of Troy 6 and Troy 7a, may be the true location of the Troy of myth and legend.
Troy 6 and Troy 7a seem to have fallen sometime between 1250 BC and 1150 BC, which line up perfectly with the previously accepted date of about 1184 BC. Shortly after the fall of Troy, the Bronze Age came to an abrupt end due to wars, plagues, new technologies, earthquakes, and other factors. The fall of Troy fits in perfectly with these events and helped mark the end of the Bronze Age. It seems that the more we learn, the more questions we have. And the more questions we have, the more we realize there is so much more to learn. Troy may have actually existed. The Trojan War may have actually happened. These characters may have been real people, and why shouldn't they be? Maybe just without their God-given abilities. Thank you for tuning in with us this evening. Check back next week as we discuss the Mayan calendar. Should we have died in 2012? Who knows? Are we on borrowed time? Maybe. My name is Lester Babsworth Esquire II, and this has been Myth-steries of the Past. Good night.
Yeah, it still sounds like a lisp. Myth-steries of the Past is made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.